Um, so I decided to use this opportunity as a chance to play around with ChatGPT 4. So I did end up springing for that $20 monthly subscription so that I could enter into that environment and poke around at some of the data possibilities using ChatGPT 4. And I specifically wanted to look at multifamily or shared housing. So those would be categorized really obviously as rooms or as a BDS, I think it is, boarding houses. Um, and I was also really curious to investigate the term H, which is used to categorize housing, but I predicted that H was actually a more flexible term used by people to identify their homes, whether or not they were living in like multi-family dwellings. And so in order to do that, I had a similar problem to Dorothy with OpenRefine. But my problem was that every time I started my uh, remote desktop, it would overheat my computer and my computer would shut down. So instead of going into OpenRefine for the project, I decided to just stick with Excel. So tools used, I used Excel and ChatGPT 4, and I think that there's a lot of possibility, which I'll go into later, to use other data visualization tools to cross-reference some of the findings that I had through ChatGPT 4 data visualizations. Um, and to start with the data, I decided instead of doing a major data refining process, I was really going to zoom in on the housing category. And so I took the full consolidated data set and first took that into Excel and used Excel to manually clean that data to separate the values H, BDS, and RMS from the address column and place them into their own new housing type column. And so I went through the first 3,900 entries manually, and then I burnt out and decided that would be the end of this sample set, since the point, more than this being an actual, indicative demographic study, was just to see what the capabilities of ChatGPT were. So I cut it at 3,900. And then I took that same data set and brought it into ChatGPT 4 and asked ChatGPT to do the same sort of cleaning for me. And so you can see here, this is a screenshot of the interaction that I had with the Gen AI. And in order to check ChatGPT's work, I asked it to identify the number of individuals that were living in beds or rooms in the CSV file that ChatGPT produced with this new housing type column. And then I also asked it in a separate conversation to identify BDS, RMS in the Excel file that I had converted to a CSV. So the results were almost identical. There was one extra individual listed in a room for the ChatGPT derived CSV file, and I'm pretty sure that's my own error in going through the 3,900 different housing types, housing entries. I probably just missed one. But so from there, I was able to gather that there are approximately 143 individuals living in boarding houses and 151 individuals living in rooms within this 3,900 entry data set. From there, we go into analysis. And in this analysis, what I really wanted to start with was by focusing on that H category. Is H actually a category that we can use when we're analyzing this data to figure out whether people are living in single family homes? And is it a really good comparative tool when we're thinking about terminology to kind of place against rooms and boarding houses when dissecting the demographics? So I asked ChatGPT, of the 3,184 individuals living in housing type H, how many share the same precise address? And a precise address I defined as having a house number and street name. And of those 3,184 individuals living in a housing type H, 1,229 shared the same precise address, including a house number and street name, with at least one other individual. So this could suggest couples. It could suggest a multi-residence building. So in order to kind of dig through that, I thought, this actually exposes another inconsistency, which is that the married women are very often, as people have described already, not included as independent entities in the data set. Instead, they are just incorporated into their husband's entry. And so in order to actually have a more accurate representation of this data, we would need to create separate entries for all of the spouses that are included in the data set. And so I give a couple examples of that here. For example, we have Cora. Cora is married to Clement. Cora is one of the few spouses who gets her own entry, but then Edith Adams has just been subsumed into her husband's entry there. So we can conclude that H addresses many single-family dwellings, but that is not a really concise term. And so we would need to really do a more in-depth demographic study where we try to match addresses to persons in order to figure out whether or not there are multiple individuals that are residing at those specific addresses. So moving on from there, I thought that it would be useful to play around with the data. Just let's assume that rooms and boarding houses are the only kind of shared housing in the data set. What would ChatGPT be able to do with that? And so I started off with a very broad question: what kind of demographic trends can you identify? And ChatGPT brought up racial distribution. The majority are white individuals living in those shared houses. Most of the occupations are clerks, nurses, engineers, mill workers. So the rooms and boarding houses are semi-professional to professional, which I thought was interesting. It's not what I would have expected necessarily. And the other interesting thing that this brought up was that among the residents, 58 are listed as Miss. So that indicates that there are a lot of unmarried women. And when I say a lot of unmarried women, this is just the code that was used to produce this prompt. I thought it would be useful to dig into how we can think about marital status within the context of this demographic data. And so I asked ChatGPT to do a little bit more data cleaning and to combine rooms and boarding houses into one category called multifamily dwelling, and then to consider marital status, race, and gender according to the residents in these multifamily dwellings. And so for the multifamily dwellings, we found that there are 28 Black and 264 white individuals, and that 58 Black and 2 white individuals are marked as married within the data set. However, as we've also seen from past presentations, the married column is not representative. It doesn't it's not distributed equally amongst Black and white entries. And something that I thought was really interesting is that the ChatGPT was actually able to pick up mistakes in the data. For example, someone is included as Black under the marital status, which is the data set accidentally conflated race and marital status, probably just from a basic error. So from there, I wanted to try to visualize it. And so these were both produced by ChatGPT 4. So we can see the distributions that were written up above in text. This is housing type by race and housing type by marital status. So yellow here is Miss and purple is Mrs. And again, always thinking about these as unstable categories, more for the purpose of playing with ChatGPT 4 than of a real demographic kind of investigation. But in the spirit of investigation, exploration, I wanted to dig more into the marital status of Miss or Mrs. And so I asked ChatGPT to isolate those individuals, which in theory would isolate women from other individuals in the subset, since gender isn't something that's specified. And so using this data, I asked ChatGPT to then produce a pie chart so that we could get a comparison of married and unmarried women who are living in multifamily dwellings. And this is the ultimate pie chart. So you can see that there's an overwhelming number of unmarried women living in shared housing compared to married women living in shared housing. And the purpose of this isn't to make any definitive statement about the data. As I said a million times, there's a lot of problems with it, but I did think that it's a really interesting way to create a kind of iterative inquiry so that should we have a much more kind of robust data set with better facets, and if I were to, maybe have another week to just clearly focus on the data, we would be able to kind of parse these different categories and really dig into it using ChatGPT. So some of my conclusions, it keeps wanting to take me to the bottom. Some of my key takeaways, what are some of the things that we can use ChatGPT for in an archival context specifically? Refining metadata. It was very efficient at creating clean data that, when checked against the data that I manually cleaned, continued to return positive results. And it was really a great way to identify inconsistent descriptions. So when we're thinking about something like, for example, when we're trying to figure out like what names are really common in this data set so that I can go through and select for those names in a tool like OpenRefine, I can use ChatGPT to identify those names for me. And then I can take that knowledge and bring it into perhaps a more transparent device or software like OpenRefine. We can test different categories. So that's what I did with H to see whether or not data seems to be stable enough to actually create a really definitive investigation. And we can reveal problems in the data as well. So I just included again some of the red flags that ChatGPT was lighting for me to know that it wasn't confident in its own data. And so that was something that I was curious to see, was that ChatGPT very openly kind of confided that it wasn't necessarily creating the most consistent results. So a word of warning, like all of these LLMs, ChatGPT isn't immune to hallucination. So I included one kind of curious logical slip up here. In one conversation, ChatGPT says there are 518 addresses categorized as H that house more than 2 residents and where the occupants have different last names. So at this point, I was trying to figure out, okay, maybe there are multifamily, or maybe there are single family dwellings, houses that have more than one family living in them, or individuals from multiple families living in them. How can I figure that out? Maybe we can trace last names and see if there's a single home with people of different last names living within that home. So I asked ChatGPT to do that. And then the first time it said that there are 518 of those houses that have people with multiple last names living in it. I asked it the same question again, and it said that there are 229 addresses categorized as H that house more than 2 residents. So something definitely to keep an eye on. And this is where I would definitely cross-reference with other data visualization tools, especially if I wasn't confident that my data was perfectly clean. So I might prompt, there's a typo there, sorry. I might prompt something like Tableau or Neo4j to produce the same sort of visualization that I was asking ChatGPT to see if it was getting similar results from the same CSV file. I would also use ChatGPT to refine data. And especially, I think the most important finding from this is that ChatGPT really enables an iterative discovery. So since it can work so quickly, it allows the researcher to ask questions that it might not have planned in advance. It's a very, it feels almost like a casual interaction where I'm playing off of something that is giving me these computational results. And because it's so accessible to me and it requires so little work on my part, I'm able to free up that creative space to ask new questions. I would also ask ChatGPT to identify unrelated individuals living in the same house. So that's something that I mentioned before when thinking about how some of these houses are maybe not the most reliable category of single family dwelling. So ultimately, I think it was an interesting project, not necessarily for the quality of the data that I pulled. That would take definitely a lot more work, but it was really encouraging as an exploration of ChatGPT to do a lot of the kind of grounding work for an archival exploration to figure out, what is it that we have here and how can we continue to kind of poke at different parts of this data to open up new research queries that then we might want to take to more reliable software. But perhaps we wouldn't have been able to think of those conversations if we hadn't had something that was so readily responsive. And that was my project.